I'm Mel Stewart, and this is the GMM podcast. And I have some questions for folks out there today. I want to know, are you someone who loves to be on the ball field or on the pool deck and stand next to somebody and watch your sport, be a part of the culture and love that conversation? But have you also been that person who's been standing there and you look to the right or the left and you realize you're standing next to an icon and you understand, oh no, I'm going to learn more than I've ever thought I could learn about this sport that I love. Today, that's going to be your experience. Today, we have the icon of icons, 9-time Olympic gold medalist, Mark Spitz.
Thank you, Mel.
You're supposed to give me a cheer or something, buddy.
You got me beat. You got a gold medal behind your head. I've never won a medal that large, to be honest with you.
So if you have 9 Olympic medals, you never have to put a medal behind your head. If you have a measly 2 gold medals, you have to put it behind your head so people go, oh yeah, that guy won 1 too.
I think it's important for your listeners to understand that being an Olympian is important. That is a major accomplishment, and it's an exclusive fraternity of people, whether you're a swimmer or from whatever sport. I have always said I was just an ordinary guy that happened to, at the right moment, did an extraordinary set of things, and I obviously trained hard for that. And I was rewarded, obviously, for my energies and my efforts. But I mean, I before there was a Michael Phelps, didn't want to be considered that I'm the benchmark of what an accomplishment means. And if you didn't win more medals or the same as I did, that wasn't good enough. And I think that I'm so happy that Michael took over the reins of that sense of responsibility. And yet it proved, I guess, and I always said this, I don't realize how good I might have been or was until somebody else came along and beat my record. And of course, we've seen that. And the cliche of beating records is they're made to be broken by somebody. And along the way, you build great relationships. And so my friendships are more important than my gold medals that I made from swimming, definitely.
Well, we're going to get into that. And we're going to get into some interesting stories. But it's I appreciate that. You know, what's interesting is that you had this, for 36 years, that was the reign. For 36 years, it was something that loomed large in everyone's mind, certainly from my period of time. So looking through my lens as a child, I woke up in the morning and you probably know what I'm going to say. I woke up and the first thing I saw was the Mark Spitz poster, 7 gold medals, 1972, 7 world records. And when I was a child, I was swimming year round at 5, from 5 to 12, everything that I did when I pushed off the wall was, all right, I'm Mark Spitz. I'm Mark Spitz now. I'm going like I was a superhero. Did you have someone like that in your life? Someone that inspired you so much?
I think so. I think that I didn't really want to admit it, but swimming at Santa Clara Swim Club with George Haynes, who was an Olympic coach several times before I made the Olympics in 1968, my first Olympics. He had a swimmer in 1964 named Don Scholander that went to the Tokyo Games and won 4 gold medals. And so at the age of 15, swimming at Santa Clara, he didn't swim that year in 1965 because he had evidently got mononucleosis. So he took that year off. And I saw him for the first time in 1966 when I was 16, and he would then have been 20. He was 4 years older than me. And he came to the pool after being at Yale for the summer program in swimming long course with Santa Clara. And George put me in a lane right next to him. And that was a big honor. I was looking at his feet a lot. Even though I was leading my lane, I really couldn't keep up with him. But the following year when I was 17, I was kind of looking at him like I was at least in view of his swimsuit. And so he sort of inspired me. As a matter of fact, so much so that there was this relay competition at the very beginning of the season called the San Leandro Relays. And it was all kinds of stupid relays, like everybody would swim a butterfly leg and backstroke and so on. But there was this one particular event called the Don Scholander 400 because he was the world record holder. And they wanted to have something that was newsworthy, that could relate to something that had to do with a legal swimming distance, like the 400-meter freestyle. And since he was there and that he drew the press and newspapers and television, we swam this race. And my good friend Fred Haywood said to me, who was a backstroker who made the Pan Am Games, as a matter of fact, that year, said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm swimming 8 laps and I'm getting in my car. You're in the car. We're going to go back to Santa Clara. And that's the end of the swimming meet. We were sitting here in the sun for 2 days fooling around. And to make this story super short, I basically broke Don Schoenlander's world record by over 2 seconds. And George basically grabbed me and whispered in my ear right after. He says, you don't have to say anything to Don. He understands what just happened. You just went from the hunter to the hunted. And Mel, I mean, when I heard that, I still remember this and get a chill thinking, what do you mean by that? And I realized the rest of what he said to me was, now your work is cut out for you. We're going to see what you can do now while everybody else is going to chase you. So it was a great experience having him as an inspiration and to break one of his world records, obviously, and swimming with him for 2 years straight. So yeah, I had somebody to look at every single day, which could get to your goat a little bit, you know.
He's a pretty cool guy. I met him.
He really is, you know, he was cooler than me because he was 4 years older and he was in college and he went to Yale, you know what I mean? And I wasn't even thinking about college when I was 17. I was still a junior in high school.
I met him at an award show and he was dressed up, sitting there. He had a cocktail, and it's as if he was holding court. And it felt like I was talking to a piece of history. It was a brief interlude, but it was a nice guy. But it's interesting that he was your guy in this 400-meter free. Mm-hmm. Did you have any clue that you were on world record pace? Did you have any idea? Because this is your first one.
Okay, so my time from the year before, give you an idea of times. The world record was like 4:12.4. And I think my best time was like 4:16. I think it was like the 18th fastest time. I mean, when I was in the nationals before, I mean, they didn't even have consolations, but I mean, I wasn't even close to making the finals. And so, you know, it's the beginning of the season, Mel. I mean, who's going to drop their best time and shaved and tapered? And I mean, this wasn't even in my thoughts. Although I did grow a little bit, but I didn't calculate that in. And neither did George Haynes calculate in that I would be dropping my times like that. And I think what it was is this. My first recollection of breaking a world record was, if I would have known I was going that fast, I think I could have started my sprint and pressure on my arms a lot sooner. But then after the fact, I tried doing that, and that doesn't help either. So, I mean, it was just a perfect race at a perfect time where I wasn't worried about anything. And we've spoken before, and I told you that I remembered the warm-up that I did, which was a stupid, crazy warm-up on that day. And I held on to that. And I did that same warm-up every time I got into an international competition or where I was expected maybe to be, you know, to win a race. I did that warm-up. And one of the reasons I did that warm-up is at the end of the warm-up, I felt fantastic. It meant that the race, relatively to me in my mind, was going to be easy to win. And if I didn't feel so good after that warm-up, then I knew I had to push myself past that pressure of this race is going to hurt a little bit more than what I would expect. But knowing that up front before I took the starter's, gun, that made all the big difference in the world of my performance and my consistency of performing.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to hear the unpacking of the Mark Spitz warm-up? Mark, what was your warm-up?
Well, at the very beginning, I would swim a 400 free. That's usually what I started out doing. But on this one particular day, I swam a lap and a half freestyle. And then in the middle of the pool, I flipped over to a 50 back, which put me back into the middle of the pool again. And then I went 50 breast, and I was back in the middle of the pool. And then I went a 50 fly, and I was back in the middle of the pool. Then I did the back and the breast again, back in the middle of the pool. And then I swam my last lap and a half. So it was crazy. And then I would do the 4 push-off 50s, and I would do either 2 or 4 starts from a block, for pace, in the outside lane like they do with your coach. If it was 100, I would only do 2. If it was a 200 race, I would do 4. And that was it. And I'd get out. And another rule that I did was if I was out of the water for more than an hour before my event, I'd get back in the water for about 5 or 6 minutes just to swim a couple laps in the warm-up pool. I didn't let myself get further than that, from not being in the water.
I'm in terms of math, I have an SEC education. You've got an IU education. Your math is better than mine. How far was that? What was your total warm-up?
At the most 2,000. Oh, I did some kicking. I did a 200 kick, and then I did a couple little pulls, like drag my feet. And that extra 200 swimming, maybe I would do I'd sprint off the wall for 12 strokes, and then I'd cruise. I mean, in a warm up in a pool, there's a lot of people in the pool. I mean, you just can't be just, hauling rear ends and crawling up somebody and trying to pass them, because there's at least 5 other guys coming the other direction. I mean, you're going to get hit in the face. So you got to just kind of mold in. Part of it's ceremonial. I mean, there's no taper in the warm up. I mean, there's no conditioning in the warm up. It's just strictly to get in there and get familiar with what the pool looks like, the turns and how cloudy it is or clear it is, what the temperature of the water is,
I told you when you told me this that was a dumb warm up, and it sounded ridiculous.
Oh, it's totally dumb, but it was the only thing that I kept hanging on to all these years, I mean, you got to go back to home base. You know what I mean? If you're in baseball, you got to stand up at home plate to be able to hit the ball. I mean, you can't say, well, I'd like to hit the ball from third base today and just have the pitcher turn around. I mean, so my home base was to do this. And then stop worrying about all this other peripheral stuff. I mean, we're psychosomatic to begin with as swimmers, you know what I mean? Because there's so many moving parts to try to get up for a particular race,
It's been listening to it a second time, hearing it a second time. It actually sounds like a great warm up. So I apologize. I was wrong. Now that I hear it a second time, this makes sense. But this is the warm up you took through your 72 performance, your 7 goals.
I did. I broke my first world record. I don't know whether it was in June or whenever it was in 1967. And that was the same warm up I did at international meets and big meets, through the last race of the Olympics, the medley relay that I swam in Munich. So what can I say? I mean, look, a lot of people out in the audience have one event. You can still do the same thing. Over my career, I learned that I could swim several events, but I always had the same warm-up. And unlike you, Mel, that actually, and I asked you this question before, how did you decide to breathe, on the right side butterfly? I never liked doing butterfly unless it was only a 50. Even I hated doing hundreds. And because my stroke would deteriorate immensely if I was doing repeat hundreds or 200s. And I said to my coaches, whether or not it was George Haynes or it was Sherm Shavor or it was Doc Councilman, why am I practicing learning how to do bad technique? I'm going to be the best conditioned bad technique swimmer in the world, which translates to I'm going to be swimming slow, but I'm going to be in shape doing it. And they kind of agreed. So I would only like to do sprint butterflies. Well, it worked for me. In today's working out, I don't know if that would work. I mean, I did swim 3 200 flies in workout a week before the Olympic trials in 1972. And the order, that was Sherm Shavor was my coach. He says, here's what I want you to do. It was the nighttime workout. We were in the middle of the taper. He says, I want you to warm up. And by the way, when I warmed up in workout, I never did that funny warm up I'm talking about in a meet. But I warmed up and he says, I want you to do 3 200 flies on the 5 minutes. I want you, the first one, to take the first 100 out. This is all from a push in a fast pace, like you're actually in a race. And then you loaf the next 100. But just keep in mind that in 5 minutes, you got to run the next one. Then I want you to reverse that. I want you to reverse that and sort of just get through the first 100 and then try to be on what the pace would feel like as far as pain for the second 100. And in the last one, I just want you to blow it out. Just see what you can do. The world record at that time that I held was 201 something. And from a push, I broke my world record in workout. So I knew I was ready to go to the Olympic trials. As a matter of fact, one of my biggest disappointments is that I didn't break 2 minutes because of that. And actually the real race. So to make a long story short, it goes back to what my father once said to me: you swim in a meet like you practice. So if you do great times and you can race in practice, then you can expect to do that. If you don't do that in practice, then how can you call on that to have confidence that you're going to be swimming fast in a meet? So Gary Hall, for an example, was a great workout swimmer. And, he was my biggest nemesis, in the latter part of my career. I mean, he at any time could beat me in the 200 fly for sure. I mean, I never told him that, but I just knew that in the back of my mind. Jerry Heidenreich for the 100 free, Roland Mathis for the 100 fly. Even though he was known as a backstroker, he was still the second fastest 100 flyer. I was always worried about who was in the race, no doubt about it.
What's fascinating is that throughout the late 60s into the 70s and into the 80s, the culture of swim was to just grind it out and do as much training as possible. And that was kind of pervasive across the culture of the sport. That changed in the 90s and into the 2000s and up to present day. It slowly trended toward what you're describing, which is you train the way you race. You're laying down neural pathways when you work out that are going to be the ones that you call on when you're racing. So they want you to be high in the water. They want you to be intense. And it's fascinating that you're hearing it from your dad, Sherm Shavor. Your coaches were doing this with you decades ahead of everybody else. I don't know if you've ever talked about this with anybody, but I'm kind of surprised to hear it. I thought that you probably just did a lot of grinding. It sounds like you were doing some very high level stuff.
Listen to me. My high level thoughts of training was last in, first out of the pool. That means translated very, very specifically, if I could get away with swimming less laps and train less and still figure out how to get to the finish line first, this was my goal. I mean, maybe this was a game I played. I mean, I certainly laid down some good repeats, and I tried to do something in a workout that was like, really beyond the call of what was expected from the coach. As an example, and I've talked to kids about, how did you train? I go, well, for an example, if the coach gave me an assignment for the whole group to swim 10 100s on the 130, and he says, I want you to start off like at 110, and by the last one, I want you to be going 1 minute. Well, I sort of would do that, but not exactly the way everybody else would do it. They would just go 110, 19, 18. And as you moved through this process, it became more difficult because you were actually increasing your speed. And even though you got more rest, the 1 extra second rest didn't overcome the energy it took to go 1 second faster. So I would go like 110, 110, 15, 110, slip one in, and then I'd go 55, and then I'd catch back up with them like 16, and then I'd go 52, and then I'd go 14, 13, and then I'd go like try to break 50 for the last one. So this was a form of my racing. And nobody was paying attention to what I was doing, but it obviously paid off. So that's how I would interpret what to do.
It sounds like you focused your energy and you burned your jets, and that did a lot for your brain. It sounds like there was some genius.
It's funny. I can relate to something about when I love doing broken swims, like broken 200, where we'd leave at the bottom of the clock, so that the first one that left, you just look up at the time and that's your time. You already did the subtraction, the 3 10-second rests. And the coach would always say, I want you to go 10 seconds faster on the next one. So one day at Masters Swimming, which I was involved with, the coach couldn't be there. And he said, look, can you do the workout for me? And it happened to be a Wednesday. And I didn't realize that Wednesdays was IM day. And so I said, we're going to go broken 200s. I want you to take your first time. And I didn't tell him what was going to happen. I said, now I want you to go 10 seconds faster. And they go, well, how am I going to do that? I says, well, you can either do this. I said, you can cheat by 2.5 seconds on the rest, or you can actually try to swim 2.5 seconds faster. I said, so you're either going to give it to me emotionally or you're going to give it to me physically, but I want it to be 10 seconds faster. Your choice. And well, how are we going to do that? I said, well, it doesn't matter whether you're cheating or not. You're going to actually get 2.5 seconds less rest, which is going to be that much more difficult. So you are giving it to me physically, whether you like it or not. So emotionally, if you're just cheating because you're just leaving 2 seconds faster, I'm going to get something out of you. And everybody in the pool at Masters went way faster than 10 seconds. And they had no idea I was going to ask them to do a second one. So by their innocence alone, they were actually learning something intuitively when I created that scenario. And somehow I think that when I look back at my swimming past, I must have been doing that gameplay with my mind to say, what and why can I do something and how can I do something to get a little bit more faster times? I'm not swimming melodically just to say I made the workout and I swam 5,000 meters today. I want to say, well, how do I get swimming faster? And I think that that's what it was. So the workout was a race for me.
I think you buried the lead on that answer. This is where you buried the lead. So someone's coaching Masters, they can't coach, and Mark Spitz shows up that day to be the coach on deck. What Masters team was this?
Oh, wait. So I forgot the funny thing. So they said, Coach, why are we doing freestyle, broken 200 freestyles? It's IM day. And I said, guess what? I'm glad you pointed out. I am a champion, and that's not what we're doing today. I am individual medley. We can work on all the other strokes. I get it.
I just think it's that's kind of cool that you're a master swimmer and Mark Spitz shows up on deck to be your coach that day. That's like, people would pay a lot of money for that. And you just showed up.
I don't know about that, but I think that my coaches worked with me. The latter part of my career, I think, is the same as what maybe Michael Phelps was, yours, Mel, that the coach, they're not coaching you. They're your confidant. They're your mentor. They're not necessarily your babysitter, but they're making sure you get to the pool, and they're paying attention to you enough to keep you motivated, because you don't really need a lot of motivation once you're at the pool. The hardest part was to get to the pool every day.
You kind of covered the training aspect, and I was going to cover that later because I wanted to hear just some philosophy and what you did. I felt like you might do something differently, because every time you talk to someone who's great, they're doing something that sounds a little crazy, but it gives them it's a big difference when it comes to your performance. What I really wanted to get into was I wanted to go back into history. And I want to hear about your early days, and because you shared a little bit of that with me, but the early days in terms of just your kid, that your first engagement with the water, where did it all start?
I can remember like it was yesterday. It was 1959. School had ended, grammar school, and my best friend that lived across the street, his mother and my mother put us into a camp YMCA program because there was a new YMCA in Sacramento that had just opened up with a brand new pool, and there was all kinds of activities. So they dropped us off at 9 in the morning and picked us up at 3 in the afternoon. And the first day I came home sort of like a little bit upset because one of the activities was arts and crafts. And what we did in that arts and crafts was I had a little piece of copper and I put like sand on it and I put it in an enclave, and I was making basically earrings for my mom. And so the global sense of what this 9-year-old was going to do, me, was I'm making jewelry for my mom. This isn't going to be too much fun. I love my mom, but it was like, I'm a guy. I just want to go out and, kick the ball, do stuff, like what you do at a camp. This is my first experience. But they didn't have us in the swimming pool because the pool had just been finished and they were filling it up with water. So my mom called over there and says, well, what about the swimming program? That was a big highlight that you guys were talking about. They said, well, we'll be ready to swim here in a couple of days. So on that day, they gave up the arts and crafts program and they put that class and subsequent classes at the pool. And there was a guy that was pretty famous. They were touting. His name was Paul Heron. He had just swum the English Channel, I think, in a record crossing. And he was the swimming instructor and the athletic director for that program. So he had everybody line up on the width of the pool, the length of the pool to swim and get in the water and hold on alphabetically. And the instruction was swim across the pool. I would like to see how you guys swim so I can put you in groups. Well, my friend's last name was Cooper and he swam. And what does your best friend do that's in the program with you? He stopped halfway and he says, showboating, I got to go first and no big deal. And everybody else was doing similar things. Well, with the name of Spitz, I was one of the last ones to be chosen. And I was a scrawny little kid, and the water wasn't really hot. It hadn't been heated enough yet. So when I swam across the pool, I didn't stop. Well, little did I know, Mel, that this guy was looking at who didn't stop. And there was about 4 of us that didn't stop in that class. And we were asked if we wanted to go out for the swim team. And his subsequent classes, then he had the same result. So at the end of the day, he had his 20 kids that he was looking at. My friend basically wasn't in the swimming program. And so I got introduced to the swimming program. And that's how I became a swimmer. Otherwise, I would have never known. At the end of about 6 weeks, there was a little novice meet that I went to. And I swam, I think it was the 25-yard free or whatever it was. When I got to that meet, there were a bunch of people with sleeping bags and cots, and they were all rested and all kinds of like sweats. And I just came in a pair of jeans or shorts or whatever it was. We didn't know anything. And my mom heard my name called from it was a time result meet only. And they said, "Hey, you need to stand here, Mark." And there were 3 circles on the deck, 6, 5, 4. And then there was a little staircase, 3, 2, 1. And I was put on number 5, and I was given a purple ribbon. And obviously it said 5th. And I kind of looked to my left and I go, God, that guy is standing on the top step. He's much higher than me, and he got a blue ribbon. I came back and handed that purple ribbon to my mom, and it had a profound effect. I said, I think I'd like to go and get a blue ribbon. And it had dawned on me at that time at 9 years old that, well, I guess if I swim and it was a time, and if I swim a faster time, I can stand on the award stand. And that was my first inkling of, hey, cause and effect. Well, to this day, I don't like purple. That was the color of the ribbon. And that's a true story.
That's a great story. But a whole lot happened between that and by the time
guess what? And Sherm Shavor was at that meet, kind of like a college recruit, and went up to my dad and said, "Hey, I like the way your son swims, even with the 5th place." He says, "I got this club, across town called Arden Hills. Why don't you have him come swim?" And my folks said, "Well, that's a big drive, and they're just getting introduced to what, parenting is about with if somebody's going to be an athlete." And there was just age group swimming had only been in its infancy for about 1 year. And, he explained this to my folks, and my father says, "Well, but, we can't afford to belong to a country club." He says, "No," he says, "I'll give your son a scholarship. I just like the way he's swimming." Well, of course, Sherm Shavor became a very inspiration to me. I swam for him at the age of 10, that following spring and summer. And at the end of that time frame, I had 17 national age group records as a 10-year-old. And somebody says, "Well, how could you do that?" Well, in those days, they had 25-yard pools, they had 20-yard pools, they had 33-yard pools, and they had pools like at Fleischacker, which was this pool in San Francisco that was like 440 yards. So they had actually pools where you'd have a rope finish. So if you swam a 50 free or a 100 free, for example, you could do it in a 25-yard pool, a 25-meter pool, a 20-yard pool by swimming, the necessary laps, 5. And so there were all these different types of pools you could break records in. So my event was basically freestyle back in those days. So that was inspiring. I wasn't a bench warmer like, say, playing Little League. And all the people around me were doing the same thing. So it was like, okay, we'll come back the next year. So I came back as an 11-year-old, but the problem was I didn't grow much. And I was in the 11 and 12-year-old category, and everybody was just whomping me as a 12-year-old. I mean, some people I think were even shaving, They might have even been driving carpool. I don't know.
You had one age group time that was like the number 1 for the world in age group. And anyway, that's what I read. So did someone track the world age group rankings? Was Swimming World?
They had Swimming World.
Yeah.
They had Swimming World. They'd just come out, and that's what they did. And they did a good job of doing that. I was once asked a question after the Olympics, after 72. Some woman came up and said, my kid is a swimmer, and he's like 12 years old, and he's doing this. He's like second, on the swim team. And, how do I get him to be a better swimmer? And his time in the 50 free is like 32 seconds. And I said, look, I don't remember a lot of my times, but I do remember one particular time. I said, here's my answer. Who is the fastest person in the city, and what team do they swim on? Maybe you ought to look at going to that club. Who's the fastest in the state? Maybe you should change towns. Maybe you should look at who's the fastest in the United States and change states. I said, that's what's done at some time with people. And I can cite this, Pete Sampras in tennis, his folks moved from Palos Verdes to Florida. Dorothy Hamill's parents moved to Colorado Springs. Don Scholander's mom put him at Santa Clara Swim Club in California from Lake Oswego, Oregon. And Mark Spitz's family moved to Santa Clara because that's where the action was. I said, but as far as your kid is concerned at 12 years old, I said, I haven't been in the water for 40 some odd years. That was about back then. I said, but I'll tell you a time that I remember that I did. I had the national age group record as a 10-year-old, I think, in the 50 freestyle, which was the event that your son does 32 seconds. I said, and my time was 28.2. Now, I know that they've improved upon that. So in answer to what your question is, I think it's necessary to figure out how to get a better coach, perhaps. I'm not saying that he's a bad coach. I don't know anything about him. But if you want your kid to swim faster than 32 seconds, which as the age of 12 is certainly slow because I was going considerably faster 40 years before, these are the facts. Sometimes the facts are very hard to absorb when parents are observing their kids. And I thought I said it the politest way. A number of years later, about 6 years later, this kid comes up to me and said, you talked to my mother in such and such a town, and you told her exactly the story. And this person was an NCAA champion, as a sophomore. I said, did you move towns? He said, no, we actually changed coaches. The whole club brought in this coach and recruited this coach. So there is an effect that's if somebody listens, that's always not a guarantee. So, to me, this was a very rewarding experience. But I learned from that because I felt self-conscious that I wouldn't do that again. I would just say, just work on getting your kid to practice every day. Keep them motivated. That's my answer. There's only about 5% of us that make it to the top. There's 12,000 athletes to go to the Olympic Games in the 250 contested sports. There's about 250 gold medals that are awarded. There are some sports like basketball that have the 10 medals because if you win, there's 10 people allowed to be on the team, only 5 on the court. But the fact is that there's about 1,000 medals that are gold medals, 1,000 silver and 1,000 bronze. So what does that make? And when you add that up, that's about 5%, 10% of the athletes are going to get medals. What does that mean for everybody else? And I think that we share a common thing that we're all Olympians. That's the first and foremost. And along that journey, if you're lucky enough to come away with a medal, that's just an added thing. But the impact of being an Olympian and going back to your community to inspire people to do something more than they would have thought that they could accomplish from the day before is what the Olympics is all about. And if by chance you can show them a medal, well, that makes it more exciting, but not more valid. And I think that's what we're talking about here.
Agreed. And I heard the same thing from John Neighbor. And I also responded to him, but medals matter.
I think they might.
I'm joking.
I think they might if you're capable of doing that. Somebody asked me a funny question, Mel, that was in the Olympic Games that was in Australia in 2000 in Sydney. I was at a press conference prior to the swimming, and they said, well, what do you think, Mark, your greatest accomplishment was? So rather than that be embarrassing to the person that asked the question, I said, well, I would say that personally, I would say probably winning 7 gold medals in 1972 would certainly top the list there, wouldn't it? There wasn't the Michael Phelps yet. He was actually swimming in those Olympics, his first Olympics. So nobody, had him in their crosshairs at the time. And the guy said, no, I don't think that was. And I'm going, okay, what was? And he says, well, swimming doesn't have statistics like baseball, runs batted in, all that sort of stuff. But he says, I kind of calculated that from the first time you broke a world record when you were 17, and you got up on the starting block at international meets, from then until you retired at the age of 22, you had like 35 world records, but you were on the block about 75 times. So statistically, about 50% of the time you broke a world record. He said, but the last 2 years of your career, you won every single race and you had 19 world records. So why would you not expect to be successful in 1972? I said, oh, that's an interesting statistic. And a while back, Mel, we talked about this, and I think that the difference between a Michael Phelps or myself or you or anybody that has been at the podium with a gold medal, and several times, like a Tiger Woods, even in golf, we're only at that moment 5% better. You look at my times and my speed. In Michael, maybe he was even less than 5% because he was winning races by hundreds of a second. I was able to win races maybe by a second or something like that at times, or half a second. But just in general, we just made it a point to always make sure that when we came to the pool, that we were always that 5% better. So it's the consistency of being repetitive in the success of winning and getting on the podium in first place that makes the illusion of our greatness even greater, when statistically, not really that great. That's why I always feared every time I went to the pool that Gary Hall was going to beat me, or Roland Mathis was going to beat me in the 100 fly, and Jerry Heidenreich was going to beat me in the 100 free. I never thought a moment that I would just pass them off to the pasture, that wasn't going to happen. But in my preparation, in my psych, and doing my stupid warm-up, I was prepared.